All right, my friends, you are looking at the once most popular fish in all of the United States fish keeping hobby. Yes, this is the Liberty Molly, a live bearer very similar to guppies. It's in the same genus, Poecilia, salvitoris, and this is a beautiful little fish that I think is an absolute joy to own. Now, at one point, this was the most popular fish in the American fish keeping hobby due to a book that came out in 1935 that nicknamed these guys the Liberty Molly, which was an oh so patriotic name, even if they fell a little short of being obviously red, white, and blue. Those colors do exist, even though the autumn colors are most pronounced in these fish when you look at them closely. But nevertheless, they were the most popular fish for import in 1935, 36, and 37 by sheer number, and they were a feature in many homes across the United States. Being live bearers, they were easy to breed, and they still are, and they are a fascinating fish to watch behaviorally and just by the colors and the changes in pattern and shape and size as they grow up, living in a community or in a tank with natural features. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about some of the interesting history of their rise to prominence and subsequent fall to obscurity, and why now they are making a comeback yet again, and we will talk about their care as well as some of the quirky, interesting stuff that goes on with these guys genetically, taxonomically, and behaviorally. So get ready and let's talk about the wonderful Liberty Molly. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Fishtory. I'm Alexander Williamson, and today I have an exciting fish to share with you guys. We are going to be going over my newest addition to the fish room, the Liberty Molly, which is a fascinating little fish. It's been in the hobby over 100 years, and it is a wild live bearer that still retains all its wild, quirky traits. So let's get into it, and let's talk about these incredible fish. All right, when talking about the Liberty Molly, probably the first thing we should cover is basic care and background. Now, these fish are found in Central America in the limestone-rich waters all along the Mexican Pacific Ocean line, as well as the Central American, Guatemalan, Honduran, and El Salvadorian borders and the water along the Pacific. Now, their range does briefly almost go all the way to the Gulf side and drain into the Atlantic, but it falls just short due to the high mountains. So these fish hang out all on the Pacific side, the west side of the mountains that divide the continent, and they're found for over 1,000 miles of territory. Now, it used to be thought that they were in the grouping Sphenopes, and in the Sphenopes grouping, that is part of the Mexican black molly grouping, or small fin mollies. But now it turns out with genetic testing, these guys are a fish all to their own, and it is their beautiful iridescent sparkle that you're getting a little taste of, but really you have to see it in person to know just how cool it looks, and the males and their finnage that make them different. Now, the females of this species can have anywhere from 50 to 150 fry each time they get pregnant, which early on was really nice because it was pretty difficult to keep truly tropical fish in a heated tank and keep them healthy. These fish can live in brackish, they can live in full salt water for a time, and they can live in full fresh. I'm keeping mine in fresh water, but you can see I've got a lot of crushed coral as well as some limestone in there, which is going to keep the TDS a little high, so something like 200 to 400 parts per million. And I don't know if you could ever even get too much total dissolved solid material in these guys' environment, in that they hang out in salt water. You're going to want to keep that water neutral to slightly alkaline with some hardness. Without that hardness, the fry will not develop their spine or their vision properly. So it is important to get some calcium in the water and have crushed coral, or boil some eggshells and put them in a filter media bag in the filter, and to have a little bit of moving water just to kind of aerate things. You could even just add an air stone, sponge filter, canister filter, hang off the back, whatever you want to do. just so that there is some moving water. They will love it. Now, it is thanks to the early forefather in the aquarium hobby and the science of ichthyology, William T. Innes, that we even know about this fish. It was first discovered in 1904 and properly named in 1909, found in Central America, and not really, regarded as anything very special, even though its colors are fairly strikingly bold in full-grown fish for a wild livebearer of its size. Now, these guys are about 1 inch to 2 inches smaller than other mollies, and they are considered the small body or short fin mollies. And that is another desirable trait, because other mollies require a 40 breeder or something that they can grow into. These guys could live in a 20 long if you have a small setup and you're keeping the fry separately and or getting rid of the fry as they have them. But they will produce a lot of that fry. So the females are constantly being courted by the males. And even back in the 1920s and 30s, it was noted by ichthyologists and in the book by William T. Innes, which was for home aquarium keepers, a whole almanac of different fish that were in the hobby in the 1930s. It noted that these fish were unstoppable, the males, that they are going to court the females 24/7, and that you should have at least 2 or 3 females for every male, and that the males will also spar with each other if it's 1-to-1 ratio. So make sure you have a good ratio of females, 2, 3, maybe even 4 females for every male, because these fish are fascinating. Look what they're doing when I keep them in a biotope tank. When I give them sand to graze on, this is spirulina algae that they're eating. So they are omnivores, and while they'll eat Daphnia, and there's actually Daphnia in their water as we speak, they are wild for algae and cyanobacteria of certain types like spirulina. They love the creeks and the little streams that just get inundated by sunlight and farm and agricultural runoff in the hills of Central America. They're these wide, shallow rivers that grow lots and lots of algae and have lots of mulm, and they kind of roll at a slow trickle as long as it isn't too steep. And that's where these fish hang out, in the ponds and marshlands inland, or they'll flow all the way down to the river and they'll hang out in the mangrove swamps of the coastal region and live in the saltier water. But their diet remains the same, which is omnivorous, with about 70% of it being plants and algae. About 30% of it is small crustaceans, insects, and little fish. So they do actually eat their fry. Now, they were named the Liberty Molly by William T. Innes in his 1935, The Exotic Fish of the Aquarium Hobby. And it was a 500-page book with over 18 editions that showed rare and unusual fish that are being kept in the American fish hobby. So while it had unusual and strange fish, it also had fish that were fairly common, this being one of them. And it was his book and his writings to local fish clubs around the country that really popularized this fish. Around the same time, fish like bettas, as well as other livebearers like guppies, or the more common sailfin mollies like these two here, were very popular in fish keeping. However, the bettas and livebearers are egg scatterers and much more difficult to raise. It turned out that livebearers didn't require keeping tanks and tanks of live food to feed to your fish like other fish did at the time. You could feed them flake food and they would do absolutely fine in captivity. And in fact, they ate the algae that was in the tanks that was such a problem of early fish keeping. A lot of times early fish keeping lights were not the best, and so they were kept in windowsills or under skylights, and they were really prone to having algae breakout. Now we don't have to worry about that so much, and it is less of an issue. But the other issue that tended to make this fish popular early on was how bright and colorful its markings were. A lot of the wild livebearers didn't have that bold of markings on their own in the wild. And it took quite a bit of line breeding to get them to have those stark colors all over their body. These, however, had those bright autumn colors, and the males were quite outgoing. So early on, they were seen as quite the colorful fish, whereas these days, not so much. But they kind of fell out of favorite because, one, the males are so darn rowdy. They protect their little group of females, which I must admit is fascinating to watch. And there are 3 males in my tank, and each one has kind of a different pecking order. So one gets to kind of control all the females. The second most powerful and colorful male gets to kind of chime in and control 3 or 4. And the bottom or least popular male doesn't seem to get to control anything out of the females in the tank. But the females also have a pecking order amongst each other in who gets to feed first and who gets to explore different parts of the tanks. And it's all really fascinating, and they interact with different materials in the aquarium very differently, be it the wood or the leaves or the sand or the crushed coral, or the plants floating or the plants growing. So I highly suggest you try to make it a biotope colony and keep it species only, which I've kind of just told you why they fell from favor. One, they don't have the brightest colors compared to the fish that became more and more popular over time, like the guppies and the mollies and the platies and the swordtails that were very, very colorful by the 1940s and 50s. Now, let's add a few more pieces of food and see if we can get a better look at some of these guys for the last of the show. But here you can see the average male. So the fact that these fish were so outgoing and so aggressive about food as well as mating made them really kind of feisty and a little more aggressive to some of the other live bears that people tended to keep with them, which made it so that people saw them as bullies in the aquarium. And by the 40s, people started writing in their local aquarium clubs about how these fish were pushy and somewhat violent or aggressive by some people's standards. Now, I would say that these fish are not violent or aggressive by like cichlid standards, but they are pretty uppity for standards of live bears or guppies. They do jump around a lot, they move a lot, and you're going to want to leave a few inches of room for them to not be able to jump out of the tank or have a lid on the tank in order to keep them from escaping and harming themselves. But as a fish overall, it turned out genetically they were related to the southern mollies and the southern live bears of Mexico and Central America, but their colors didn't seem to hold true when being crossed with other live bears and other molly species. So early on, it was figured out by the 1940s that they didn't really produce super colorful or even large-finned offspring when hybridized or when crossed or line bred. And while there is a very bright red morph of this molly that was created in captivity, there is not really any morph other than this wild style that holds true for multiple generations. And over time, between that and how active these little fish are, they kind of fell from favor. Until recently, when people started rediscovering some of the incredible live bears that have been overlooked just in their natural coloration and their natural behavior. People keeping these or black chin metallic live bears in colony-style breeding arrangements started to realize that they have very, very interesting personalities and behaviors, and that when you give them a biotope aquarium and not just like a plain gravel or grass or glass bead or marble aquarium at the bottom, when you give them different substrates and plants, they have an extremely complex social network and behavior profile that you will spend days and days, weeks and weeks trying to decode and understand, which makes them a super fun fish for the modern hobbyist again today. All right, my friends, the next time you guys go out and think about getting a fish, particularly a live bear or a colony breeder, something that you want to keep in a species-only tank, give the Liberty Molly a second look. Give them a shot. They're a really active fish, fascinating behavior, and as long as you make sure that there are 3 or 4 females to every male, I think you're going to have a good time raising these fish. and your only problem is going to be what to do with all the babies. All right, you guys, I'll see you next time. Take care and have a good day.